Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another podcast of the Center for Asian American Christianity. My name is David Chao, and it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce our guest for today, Professor Gillian Chu. Hi, Gillian.
Thanks for inviting me.
Let me kind of just introduce some of your background to our audience.
Mhm.
So, Professor Ann, it's Ann Gillian Chu. I call you Gillian. Is assistant professor of the Academy of Chinese History, Religion, and Philosophy Department within the Hong Kong Baptist University. You have a wide range of interests. When I saw you this past summer, we spent a little bit of time talking about lived theology. It's
Mhm.
theological reflection that incorporates social scientific empirical observations, especially ethnographic participant observation, along with oral history interviews. And I think you and I both find this type of grounded research methodology extremely helpful for doing theology that is conversant with our social environments. And the 21 case of our conference with the political unrest and theological responses in Hong Kong being one case study of your
Yeah.
research. Your research is ongoing, and we have this phenomenon between Hong Kong in recent years and the UK with this BNO migration. So I thought, Jillian, perhaps you could just explain to our American audience what this BNO migration policy is.
Sure. So it's I guess it's a bit of an extension of my previous project because it was about protests and how people were understanding the protests and their role in it as Christians. And so since then, uh, in it sort of ended around 2020 when there was the introduction of the national security law in Hong Kong, and also with the COVID-19 pandemic. There were less to almost none protests since then. And so once the national security law was introduced, the British government was saying how they think this doesn't jive with the Sino-British joint agreement that was in 1984. So prior to Hong Kong being handed over from Britain to China in 1997. And so they think that Hong Kong people needed perhaps a way out, or they thought they needed to provide a way for Hong Kong people to continue to live in a way that they feel comfortable with. And so that's why they have introduced a visa for people who hold the British National Overseas Passport. These are people who were born before 1997 in Hong Kong. And so previously, even though this was a travel document, they had no right to remain in the UK. And now they're able to have a visa where it will eventually allow them to settle in the UK. So that's still sort of up in the air because the first batch that moved are not up for this test that they have to take to be able to be naturalized and settled yet. And there has been a lot of back and forth with the British government as well. There's all sorts of tension going on, like most places in the world right now. And so there's also sentiments against immigrants in the UK as well. And so this is still sort of kind of up in the air as to whether they will eventually settle or not. But having said that, a lot of people who moved this time around are much younger and more in the working class. So, for example, I am Chinese Canadian. My grandfather moved to Canada around the 60s, something like that. And so that was a time when people had more of an investment migration. And so those who were moved at that point were slightly more affluent. In previous generations, say, for example, those who migrated to Canada or to the States in like 60s, 70s, they tend to bring their older adult parents along. Sometimes for childcare, sometimes it's just like it's hard to travel back and forth that much at that time. And now because this generation of people moving to the UK tend to be from working class, one of the issue is that their parents might not be English speaking. They might not feel comfortable living in the UK, and so they choose not to move, and they choose to remain in Hong Kong. And also, uh, there's because technology that is present here and now. Say, for example, the way that we're recording this over the internet, and so they're able to converse with their children whilst they're being still in Hong Kong. And so there's less of a push towards them wanting to move to the UK. And so so there are different cases, but most of the time, the older adults' parents would remain in Hong Kong. And one thing that caught my eye was there were so older adult suicide in Hong Kong has been a record high. At one point, it was reported in 2023, and that's so when I started conceptualizing this project, and I was like, oh, that's well, that's obviously disturbing, but also like that is why? Like they choose to remain here mainly because like perhaps food, perhaps family, perhaps friends, network, maybe medical system, and what is lacking in their support? Why do they find this so traumatic that they think suicide is their option? And how do churches and Christian organizations support these older adults, both just general public, but also Christians specifically? How can they support them? And so, so that's why I started thinking about this project and how these organizations are able or are currently already doing work in support of older adults who remained in Hong Kong. And so it's interesting to think about this, and then I stumbled across this funding by the John Templeton Foundation that is set in the University of Birmingham and ran by a psychologist of religion, Dr. Carissa Sharp, who is the main grant holder, and she's put out a call asking us if there's anybody who's interested, theologians, and interested in learning more about psychology. And so I signed up for it, and through a competitive process, I gained a grant from this, and I've started a year-long project, and it's actually ending at the end of October. So I'm kind of sad, but at the same time, it's been such a joy to learn a whole different way of talking about theology using different language of a psychology language, and also exploring with other people, other theologians as well, who are also training in learning the psychology language.
Well, this is a great kind of opening overview of your research and project, and you've said so many things that I want to pick up and explore further with you. So part of what I'm hearing from you is how there's been some recent movement from Hong Kong to the UK through this British National Overseas Passport that is a relatively, and how the kinds of folks that have taken up this B&O possibility are usually younger and usually working class, and that their older parents have stayed and remained behind in Hong Kong. You then have tapped into some of the more kind of the psychological trends that have been a kind of consequence from this movement involving suicide rates increasing with the older generation that have remained in Hong Kong because of this family separation. So those are kind of some of the features of the case that you've discussed, and I want to just gain some more background information. So just going back a little bit for the history of this, when did the B&O passport come into play?
It was introduced at the time when uh, after the Sino-British Joint Agreement was introduced. At that time, they also granted some people actual British citizenship. And so uh, mostly they were involved with the government. So, for example, a lot of the police force migrated to the UK, and also there's also those who are indigenous in Hong Kong, and so who have been granted British citizenship just straight off the bat. And then this British National Overseas Passport was sort of a extension or a substitute of just giving everybody in Hong Kong British citizenship. So because they were like, this is not going to work out. And so right before, up to the point of 1997 handover, people who were born before the handover, so the July 1st, were all entitled to apply for this. So you have to actively apply for it. They don't just give it to you. And so once you have applied for it, you can continue to apply for this travel document since then. And there has been a lot of debate as to the purpose of it. So is this a thing that is legal? So because if you're in Hong Kong here and now, you would be entitled to apply for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region passport, so under the Chinese government. And so this travel document recognized, or is this a thing going forward in Hong Kong or in China? And so there's a lot of question mark towards that as well. And so having said all that, this has been a way for the British government to express um, their political stance towards what's been happening in Hong Kong. And so of course, the Chinese government would take issue with the sort of stance, and the pushback would be that the British government is meddling with Chinese affairs. That's quite a common way of expressing. And but that has continued to be a track that Hong Kong people have been applying to. And so it's interesting because you were talking a bit about migration and the sort of migration trends, or what people moving, that you were using that term, and I really liked it because I think migration, it has a certain economic, or at least some sort of privilege in it. So people might be pushed to do a certain thing. Like they might feel like they're being pushed to move somewhere, but at least they it's sort of still kind of by choice. So as opposed to like maybe refugees, for example. So there's still sort of some sort of stigma or like privilege towards the sort of words that we use. And so people in Hong Kong have been migrating or moving to the UK. And at the same time, Hong Kong has introduced a set of different rules, migration rules. And so there has been a lot of people from mainland China moving to Hong Kong as well. And so there has been a change in the sort of demographic in Hong Kong here and now. And so the sort of language that we would use, the sort of brands or the sort of food that we would be familiar with would be quite different at this point. And so there has been a lot of mainland Chinese brands that has been moving towards Hong Kong, and a lot of different tools that's been used, maybe like apps, for example. So like Deliveroo, which is a UK food delivery app, has have moved out, and Keto, which is a mainland Chinese food delivery app, has been a big thing in Hong Kong here and now. And so it seems like it's taking over. And so the way that Hong Kong has been moving, there's Hong Kong has always been a very transient place. And so people have always been moving in and out. And what is Hong Kong? And that has always been a big question mark. And so there's been pockets of Hong Kong at a certain time being preserved all around the world. So my family, that's from Vancouver. Vancouver has a very specific type of Hong Kong that's going on. So affectionately known as Vancouver, it has preserved a very specific slice of Hong Kong that is no longer here and now. And also wasn't here for quite a few decades, actually. And so as I'm currently also a visiting research fellow at the University of Leeds. So I visit Leeds in England quite often as well. And there's been a lot of people from Hong Kong who recently who's moved to Leeds. And I see that there's a very specific um, time of Hong Kong that's been preserved in Leeds as well. And I find it fascinating and endearing. And at the same time, it does not exist in Hong Kong anymore. And so it's interesting to see how Hong Kong continues to manifest both in sort of its identity and all over in the world. And at the same time, how people understand what being a Hong Konger or what being a Hong Kong Christian is. And so with this current migration wave, the churches in the UK has grown exponentially and sometimes seriously exponentially. So like there are churches where there might be like 20 people attending a service, and there's only one service. And these 20 people are also those who are serving in the service. And after this migration wave, it suddenly became like 300 people attending that church. And there's no way you can fit some 300 people in this, like what was 20 people. And then there's the sort of dynamics and then the sort of people issues as we can expect. And some people, and there has been all sorts of new churches that's booming because of this very recent migration wave and the way that people are thinking about faith and the way they think about denomination and how that translates to the UK. It's been fascinating.
I want to key in on the description of, I think you were specifying Chinese churches in the UK, one in particular growing from 20 to 300 in recent years due to this uptick in migration from Hong Kong to the UK, presumably through the B&O passport. Say a little bit more about how this migration trend is affecting Chinese churches in the UK. How is it so one, is it unprecedented? Did we see this type of uptick before 97 with people leaving Hong Kong for the UK? And if not, then what's different now? So say a little bit more about the push and pull factors and the legal instruments such as the B&O passport that allowed for this. And give me the time period too, because I'm still fuzzy. I know that you mentioned the B&O was in place, people could apply for it prior to 97, but we're talking about, I think your time scale now is within the last 5 years. So if you could give some historical points of reference, that would help me a lot.
Yeah, so the BNO is a travel document. It's a passport. And so it has been in place prior to the handover in 1997. But the visa in itself is a new thing. So it's introduced in 2020. And I'm not sure why. Um, I guess they have to think of ways where to say who gets to move to the UK and who doesn't, right? So they have to draw a line somewhere. And so they used those who hold BNO passport and perhaps their spouse, their children, their parents as the sort of anchor point. And so so while the passport is something that they could have applied for a very long time ago, the visa is something that's very recent, which is why the move is very recent. In the rest of the UK, there has been a movement called hashtag Hong Kong Ready. And so you would see people like Reverend Mark Nam, who talks a bit about his like churches being Hong Kong ready and being able to host these Hong Kong migrants and be able to support them during this migration. And also, there's been a lot of so in this migration wave, what's interesting is how people see this as being time sensitive. Pastors or social workers, they tend to say things like, "Oh, yeah, the older adults are perhaps angry, perhaps frustrated, or because their children have moved away and then they are sort of just left behind and they feel abandoned, for example. And or like to a perhaps less negatively expressed, they would be like, at least they felt powerless. But they see that this is a strategic move for their children and grandchildren. Um, so when this is illustrated in this sort of way, I'm like, okay, got it. So people are moving because of education opportunities or like work opportunities, and then I've sort of been carrying this mindset as I was like conducting interviews because that's what people have been telling me. And when I am actually in the UK, actually, sometimes there are people who did not simply move because of that. Sometimes they've moved because they know that if they were in Hong Kong, they will be prosecuted. And so they they had a very short period of time to leave. And so these are perhaps some of them perhaps very high profile, some of them not. Some of them they don't see a way of staying or returning or visiting Hong Kong ever. And so they then that's a whole set of feelings and reasons as to why they moved and how they moved and the sort of urgency in that. And so, of course, adults are facing the sort of trauma-informed kind of issue, but then at the same time, um, children as well. And so, children and teenagers, sometimes they are not told they are moving until they're on the plane. Um, and so that creates a lot of emotions that perhaps are difficult or unable to process because I mean like you didn't know you were moving a whole different country and then now you're suddenly there. And so there have been social workers and also like um, people in clinical psychiatry who's been working with these children and their parents in the UK to be supporting them in this as well. And so this brings a whole host of issues in the sort of people moving space because uh, children are facing issues. Young couples are facing issues in their move, and perhaps they're not able to ever return to Hong Kong, so they might have to visit their parents in a different country. So, like somewhere in the middle between the UK and Hong Kong, perhaps that will incur costs, of course, but also are their parents fit for travel for how long? And will they eventually not be fit for travel? What will happen? And it also brings like the issues that for those who continue to remain in Hong Kong. So if these parents do they have other children? Are the other children able to support them? Do the other children feel like they are now the sole caregiver? Um, is this gonna negatively impact their life? And if there ain't no other children, that means there are two older adults, or maybe one, but sometimes two. And so this has also been a societal issue that's been widely discussed in Hong Kong. So if there's an older adult caring for another older adult, how do we support this sort of caregiving? There's been a case where there's like a homicide suicide issue where the spouse I was trying attempt homicide at for for the person that they're giving care to. This is not and also this is not a for this particular case, they are not working class. So they had help at home. They lived in a relatively affluent gated community. But it was just the sort of emotional burden that they've been carrying. And so there has been a lot of issue, which is why I think in this case, I'm thinking this project can inform how Christian organizations and perhaps, and by extension, other faith-based organizations are able to support um, caregivers, both locally, both perhaps other family members, or perhaps um, the older adult couple, or how does transnational caregiving look like? And so, and perhaps how do social workers, like with their limited resources, are able to support these people who are caregiving in many different ways? And how does this sort of supplement what the government is able to provide? And so I think for me, this project has been interesting in the way that it's able to give some narratives of what's been happening. And so I've talked, like, as I was talking about what sort of reporting, there's quite often in Hong Kong, as in many different places, we like statistics, we like numbers, we think numbers speaks for themselves. And I don't like that. I don't think numbers speaks for themselves. It has to be interpreted. It has to be understood in a specific way. And when we think that numbers speaks for themselves, it's problematic. And I think for this project, having the sort of narratives to be able to supplement the numbers gives us a whole like different perspective and be able to sort of draw a more complete picture to the what's been happening.
So, say a little bit more about how the mental health consequences present themselves in your interviews and observations, both with those in the UK and with those in Hong Kong.
So my project focused on those who remained. And so with the psychology uh, slash theology funding that we've had, actually, we've also, so Dr. Carissa Sharp also funded another project, which is with Dr. Yip Man He, who's in the States, and her project is related to those who have already moved to the UK. And so I find it fascinating that our projects sort of complement one another and both using this sort of psychology idea. And so her project was more on hope. And so the idea of hope for those who have moved. And my project looks a bit more of like the sense of loss and the sort of trauma-informed theology that can and that's for those who have remained. And so I think one thing that I found from my interviews that were, I guess it's surprising for me. I don't know why I found it surprising, but um, older adults who tend to talk to me are super upbeat. They're like, yay, this is happening. Awesome. And I think as I was thinking about this, because it doesn't really match with the sort of narratives that the pastors or the social workers been telling me. And so I'm like, well, why is that the case? I guess it kind of makes sense because for sort of on one hand, there's this sort of saving face kind of thing. They don't want to talk trash about their children. And so I guess I can see that. And also because they don't know me. And so if they're like just talking trash about their children to like a random stranger, perhaps a researcher, somebody who's gonna like record what they said and actually write about it, I can see why they would feel uncomfortable as like Asian parents. And at the same time, I can see like those who are willing to talk to me, obviously they have find a way to cope so that they're able to process this and being able to talk to other people about it. And so those who are in doing interviews with media, mass media, and doing research, quite often they have a very specific narrative, like their ways of coping and like how they see this as a good opportunity and how they would often go visit their children and grandchildren, and also like what they're continuing to do in Hong Kong. So, for example, like quite often volunteering. So in churches and in their local nonprofit organizations, they're able to volunteer, and that takes up most of their life. And so that creates a new routine for them. These are people who are coping well. And so this is a very specific set of people, and so I'm really happy for them. And I also wanted to explore like what if they're not those people? What would happen? And so at the beginning, I was like, it's hard to ask people like, why are you not unhappy? Like, tell me why. It's kind of weird, and it's sort of also like um not quite ethical. Like it's like be angry or be upset. Like that's I guess the university would not be too happy for me like going around telling older adults this. And so I've been trying to think of ways to get around um them and then asking sort of good questions where I'm able to get the sort of answer the sort of questions I have. And so one way that I started doing this was like say, hey, I know you're feeling this is great. Do you see people in your community, like maybe other like brothers and sisters in Christ, are feeling like down? And that sort of worked, like say my friend feels this. That kind of worked out a little. And also like bringing in images like of people, um, older adults, perhaps like bringing news clippings and also bringing like Bible verses of like migration and family, and that sort of help them contextualize this and be able to share a bit more about not only their really awesome experience, because they're the only ones that are willing to talk to me. Those who are like super depressed are not getting themselves out of bed to talk to me about this. But also experiences of others that they have encountered. And I think that has been helpful in for me to understand why and perhaps how uh, Christian organizations and the government are able to support older adults in this very specific time. And I'd also talked to another social worker who um, Christian organization specifically works with these older adults. And one thing that the social worker was telling me was that um, they they do a lot of support, tech support. So this is not something that they imagine they would be doing as social workers. But then they have to set up Zoom, they have to set up WhatsApp calls and then like show them which button to press, download everything. And so that they're able to talk to their children regularly, sometimes on a daily basis. And so like they have very specific setups, and then they go to their homes and help them to set that up. And their children would also call these social workers in these Christian organizations and be like, "Oh, how's my parents doing? Like, in this and that, and are you able to help them with this?" Or like, "I'm going to be back at a certain time. Can we talk about certain things?" So, they're the organizations are supporting more than just the older adults who remain. They also support the transnational caregivers who have moved abroad already, but they continue to be in part of this conversation through technology. And so I think one thing that really categorizes this current wave of migration that's been really different from the prior migration, it was that it's how technology has been playing such a big role in it, especially after COVID. People have been used to using like video calls, and so this is, and also there's also a lot of things that's streamed online. So those who have moved abroad continues to be part of like their church in Hong Kong, sometimes through like attending service online, sometimes attending like fellowship online. And so they continue to have this community, even though they've moved away. And so I continue to think about this and I wonder what it would look like. But in prior waves of migration, Hong Kong is sort of like sending off its theologies to places where people have been moving. But in this wave, it has been quite different because there's been people who've moved there and back. There's people who have been traveling around a lot. There's been people who've been posting things online. There's a lot of Christian like KOLs, like influencers who talks about their migration and also talk about faith. And so and I wonder what the theology is the cross-pollination of theologies would look like. And this now is still early to tell, but like I'm excited to see how that would look like in at least another 5 years.
So there's two features of the technology piece I want to pick up. This is
Mhm.
fascinating. So the first, so I'll begin kind of practically. So practically, I wonder how much technology figures into the calculus for the adult children leaving. So for example,
Mm,
would they leave if they didn't have FaceTime, Zoom, whatever digital
mm,
medium to communicate with their parents? Perhaps they're thinking, doesn't matter if we move to the UK because we can still Zoom with my parents and talk.
mm,
That technology makes it easy. Therefore, the ease of communication via technology diminishes the stress of intercontinental communication. You can still preserve that across space through technology, only to find out grandma and grandpa don't know how to like turn on Zoom, or they did a what is a software update on their computer or phone, and it wiped out the settings, and then they have to call in the digital tech folks to help set up their grandparents. I think that's such a practical thing that has massive consequences, right? It's kind of
mm,
like the use of technology presupposes your ability to use it, and your ability to
mm,
use it may be constrained by how comfortable you are with doing things like settings and finding the Wi-Fi signal or what have you.
mm.
So I'll stop there and let you comment on the calculus. Like, were people anticipating the use of technology as part of the condition for moving so far away from their parents?
Mm. So I haven't spoke to adult children who've moved directly, so I don't actually have the data for that. But I have spoke to a pastor who talked about this specific issue in Hong Kong. And so one thing that the pastor commented on was that um, during COVID, I think what you talked about is actually quite on point. There's a lot of expectation that, of course, with this technology, people are able to make use of it. And like the world is so small right now because of all that. But at the same time, we're still bounded by our physical presence. And during the pandemic, when there's so much lockdown, and that coincided with the introduction of the visa. So once the visa was given, people had to be in the UK at a certain time. And so once they've moved there and with Hong Kong's pandemic restrictions, there were people who were just sort of uh, for lack of a better word, stuck there, while their parents are facing like poor health and eventually dying in Hong Kong. And so they were unable to be back because of the COVID quarantine restrictions. And so, and they had to attend like the funeral online. And that has also created massive guilt. Uh, this I'm recounting secondhand from the pastor who shared this with me, but um, the sort of guilt that has been internalized for not being there for their parents as they're dying, and the expectation that they were able to be there for their parents, given the advancement of technologies, both like in terms of travel and also with online means of communications. This is interesting because we often think that we are quite cerebral beings, especially in Hong Kong. Um, I think there is certain expectation that we're rational, we're pragmatic, and we process things. And there's there needs more of how we're being embodied in our own physical presence and how we're we're not meant to be in like many different places at the same time. And we're meant to enjoy our physical presence in a specific space with people that we enjoy being with. And one thing that slightly unrelated to my project, but at my university, we're pushing this, we're launching the metaverse, the university metaverse. And and of course, the first thing that people asked once we were trialing it, and there's this person who of course asked, "Can I be in two places at the same time?" And I'm like, "Why? Why? We're meant to be in just this place at this time for a reason, to enjoy being with each other and to be in community." And just it's just so stressful to think that I need to be in both this meeting and that meeting and that meeting all in this time. That is ridiculous. But that quite often is the urge for like a very capitalist society where efficiency is just so much more valued than things like solidarity and community.
I also want to thank you. That's a really profound reflection. I would rather not be in two meetings at the same time. So I concur with you. Um, the role of technology seems to complicate how theology moves across space and time. Because the earlier image you said was one of emanation from a center. So if Hong Kong was a center of the diaspora, Cantonese Christian diaspora, then the theology kind of goes from the center outwards. How does that affect theology, the flow of our Christian faith and practice?
Mhm. So, the theology of the diaspora, if we think about it, should perhaps only affect the diaspora. But actually, in the current conversations, it's working its way back into Hong Kong. So, for example, Reverend David Wu, a who was the director of the Hong Kong Church Renewal Movement prior to his retirement. He now lives in Bristol in England, and he's recently written in his own blog that his reflections on people in Hong Kong wanting to say, quote unquote, evangelize or do mission trips in the UK, and how he thinks about issues like that and how he would respond to that. And because taking advantage of the internet, he's able to disseminate his pastoral thinking. He continues to preach in the UK, and and he's continued to support Hong Kong Christians in the UK, and and this this sort of dissemination would have at least taken time, if not slightly difficult, in sort of like a pre-internet age. And this conversation has sort of in a tiny way exploded on social media because of the ways that he has expressed himself and also the ways that other people have responded. And so there is a lot of real time conversations that's been going on, both people in Hong Kong and with people in the UK and with people everywhere else just sort of watching it. And so this this sort of effect would not have been available if it weren't for the internet. And with social media, things are quite often kept in indefinitely. And so there are people who continues to respond to posts that were like, say, months, years, decades ago. And so there were posts that perhaps were there like quite a long time ago, but people it keeps on resurfacing and people keep on engaging with it. And the internet has sort of allowed things to be not only existing at the here and now and in this very space that we currently occupy, but also be able to converse with people who were a very long time ago talking about a certain thing. And while I know that is obviously what books and like have been around for a very long time, but at the same time, the sort of way things are being posted on social media, um, the way things trend, the sort of algorithms that are behind it, it brings a different um, tone into the conversation that we're able to engage and who is able to engage. Because if we think about who writes books and who are able to put their voices out there, quite often um, they have to either have money or they have a certain level of education or they're respected in certain ways. And social media sort of levels the playing field, allowing people to think about things and saying it out loud and see how it works, test it without necessarily having the gatekeeping of editors. I love my editor, so I'm not saying that I love my editor and I think they deserve the job that they do. It's so crucial. At the same time, it's interesting to watch social media without filter, how people sort of express themselves and the sort of engagement and the sort of cat fights that are available because of this platform creates a whole different sort of Christian community on cloud. And the way that we do community now might not be what we imagine it would be. And so what is the church? Like, how do we think about church and how do we think about our own like little church communities? How does it continue to work? So it's evolving so much because of all this people moving around and also the technologies that are available and how people are currently engaging.
Perhaps for my last question, because this has been quite an exhilarating conversation, traversing so many topics. The movement of your mind across all these disparate spheres is really invigorating. How has so we're talking about the evolving church. We're talking about digital technology as part of that evolution and what we think of community as primarily in person. You see the person next to you, you go up and take the bread and the wine together on Sunday. You sing and hear people, you hear the off tune guy next to you or the in tune operatic female voice next to you. Like that's the physical embodiment of a living community. But technology is perhaps altering our practices and imagination of what community could be.
Mm.
Pastors, especially with this B&O visa, with the separation of intergenerational families, their caregiving now needs to perhaps evolve. I don't know. Do you
Mm.
have cases and stories or observations of how churches in Hong Kong are responding to the trauma of migration upon the elderly and upon those who remain in Hong Kong?
Quite often, the adult the pastor of the older adults ministries are would say that they are continuing to do what they have always been doing. And I can see that to a certain extent. And I think what has been valuable is not only the pastor's work, though, of course, it's very important, but the pastors were also saying how they see the community bonding and being able to support one another. One of the pastors was telling me how so they don't go to medical appointments with the older adults because there's like a couple of hundreds of them. Like if the pastor just went with everybody to the medical appointments, that would be just all they do. It would not be possible. But they could see how older adults would just sort of team up and go with one another. And and so I think it's such a blessing to see having see the pastures building this fertile ground for a community to flourish. And I don't, and of course, the works of the pastures are important, and but I see that more as well, work of God and being able to create and provide the space for community and for non-blood related families to be able to support one another. And I think that comes a lot with the language as well, calling one another brothers and sisters and in Christ. And that sort of creates a sense of family within the Christian church. And I have also been told by another pastor that some older adults likes to go to. Um, so there are Hong Kong quite often, in terms of fellowship, are separated by age. And so um, as Hong Kong is, we're a very efficient society. But is that necessarily the best way to create communities? And so there are pastors who see that when there are little groups, cell groups, where there are people from all walks of life, the older adults are able to sort of take on their fellow brothers and sisters in Christ as quote unquote their children to a certain extent. And the younger Christians in the cell group are also sort of able to support these older adults as well. And this provides a another way of imagining what family can look like. And and I think this is nothing new, obviously. And but this has been such a support for these older adults, and the way that they can see that they're still quote unquote useful. um it's somehow important for them to think of themselves as being useful, and that they are being a contributing part of this community, being able to share their experiences, and that has give them a renewed sense of meaning in life. And also, when the older adults, when their children in the UK goes to church and have a community to be a part of. So um, there was one older adult who was telling me how their child now is the worship team leader, and their family is all going to this church, and I can see that the way they understand it is this sort of grand narrative, the Christian narrative, where they're all this part of Christian family, although they're separated by geographically, they are still part of this community in Christ, be it right now or in the future, the eschaton. They're still continuing to be this community together. So both locally, with other fellow brothers and sisters, and also transnationally with their children in different church communities, provides a new sense of meaning and sort of empowers them in a way that I think this is perhaps this sort of renewed sense of meaning is something that both the church, nonprofit organizations, and also the government can explore in terms of the providing support and care for older adults who continue to remain either on their own or with both older adults in one household.
Jillian, I think that's such a wonderful reflection to conclude our conversation on. I've enjoyed exploring how migration, digital technologies, and the transnational care that these conditions help foster. I've enjoyed exploring these with you. Thank you so much for your research and for sharing your insights with me and our audience. And I hope we can stay in touch to continue to learn from your research and your projects.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to like further conversations. And if there's people who've listened to this and wanted to ask more questions, it would be great if you could put us in touch, and I'll be happy to share a bit more as well.
Awesome.